The transit vessel Meridian ran a processing corridor on its lower deck, intake hold 7, and my job was to keep the environmental systems alive down there. Scrubbers, circulation fans, the humidity rails that kept the processed air breathable. I crawled into conduit hatches, bled pressure lines with a wrench, and logged readings on a handheld 3 firmware versions behind. The compact paid me a technician's rate and gave me a bunk the size of a generous coffin, and expected me to be grateful, and most days I managed it. The hold processed displaced persons, the polite compact term for beings whose homeworlds had been absorbed, dissolved, or administratively erased, left to pass through intake like freight. They came in with a species designation, a sector of origin, and a number, nothing else. The intake clerks called them by number. The security detail called them by number. The medical screeners called them by number. It was efficient, I was told. It prevented what the compact called inappropriate attachment between processing staff and transit persons, a way of saying, don't learn their names, because names make it harder to stamp the forms. I learned her name on the 3rd morning. She was in the holding row nearest the primary circulation duct, which I accessed twice a day to clear the intake filter. I'd noticed her the day before. You couldn't help it. She was tall for a seated figure, her posture straight even on a bench designed to be uncomfortable. Pale sage-green skin, smooth and slightly luminous under the overhead lighting. Her hair was dark charcoal, pulled back without ceremony. Her eyes, when they tracked you, were amber with a ring of silver at the outer edge, and they tracked everything in that hold with a quietness that wasn't resignation, it was observation. She was watching the space the way a person watches a space they intend to understand completely before they decide anything about it. Her tag read, VT1194. I was running the filter check, 3 feet from her bench, when she said, without looking at me, the secondary return valve on that duct is running 3 degrees hot. You'll lose the filter seal within the next 18 hours if you don't adjust the pressure differential. I stopped. I looked at the duct, then at her. How do you know that? I asked. Thermal variance in the exhaust output, she said. I have been listening to it since I arrived. The tone shifts at irregular intervals. 18 hours is generous. It may be 12. She was right. I checked the handheld. The reading was sitting at the edge of tolerance, and I hadn't flagged it, because I'd been watching the wrong column. I made the adjustment, bled the valve, and the tone in the ductwork dropped half a register. It would hold now. I stayed where I was. Thank you, I said. She looked at me then. Just a look, not warm, not cold, measuring. I'm Devon Orth, I said. Ship systems tech, I'm in here twice a day. A pause that was longer than it needed to be. Then, Ithran Vel Sorath, not VT1194. Ithran Vel Sorath. I said it back to her quietly to make sure I had it, and she gave a small, precise nod, and that was how it began. I called her Ithran from that morning forward, not when the clerks were in the room. I wasn't stupid and she clearly didn't want a scene, but whenever I was running my checks and it was just the ambient sound of the hold and the hum of the circulation system, and her sitting with that careful stillness, I'd come through the hatch and say quietly, "Morning, Ithran," and she'd look up, and something in her expression in that moment I learned not to name, because it belonged to her and not to me. She had been a systems engineer on a seat vessel before her homeworld was dissolved. The word she used, like a compound in water, the way the compact talked about things it had absorbed and redistributed. The Sorath seat had held 17 inhabited stations. In the new registry, those stations existed under different sector classifications. Their original designations struck. Ithran Vel Sorath, last heir apparent, had been re-entered as a displaced transit person with no lineage designation on record. VT1194. She told me this in pieces, over 4 days, the way someone tells you something they have told themselves so many times it's become flat. No bitterness in it, just the shape of a fact. What she was focused on was the resettlement queue. She had applied for technical placement in compact sector administration. She had qualifications. She knew systems the way I knew ductwork, by listening to them, by feeling where the pressure was wrong. They'll place you, I said. They'll place VT1194, she said, with whatever assignment is available for an unclassified displaced person of unknown lineage. The resettlement queue does not sort by what you know. It sorts by what you are recorded as being. I didn't have an answer for that. I bled a pressure line and thought about it. On the 5th morning, the last day before resettlement queue processing, the compact lineage verification sweep ran through intake hold 7, routine biometric cross-reference against the central registry, looking for outstanding legal claims or identity disputes. 4 minutes, nobody looked up. I was at the far end of the corridor, replacing a relay board in the secondary conduit housing when the sweep completed. The intake clerk scrolled through the readout with the expression of someone who had done this 800 times and expected nothing. Then she stopped. She looked at the tablet. She looked at the row. She said, VT1194, please report to the primary intake station for classification review. Ithrin stood. She walked the length of the row without hurry, hands at her sides, posture what it had always been, that steady uprightness that I had watched for 5 days without being able to say exactly what it reminded me of, except that it reminded me of something that had not been diminished by anything that had tried to diminish it. She reached the intake station. The clerk turned the tablet toward her without a word. The biometric return had populated the full compact lineage field, Ithrin Vel Sorath, heir apparent of the dissolved Sorath seat, lineage classification Tier 1, compact registry reference active, status, pending reinstatement review. The clerk said, in a different voice than she had used before, your classification is being updated. Ithrin looked at the screen. She looked at it for a long moment with an expression I could not read from across the room. Then she turned her head, and she looked across the hold, and she found me before she looked at anything else. I was at the conduit housing with a relay board in my hand and grease on my forearm. I said quietly, Ithrin, not your highness, not VT1194, not the designation the screen was currently printing in large certified text on a compact registry update form. Just her name. Her expression shifted. Not a collapse, nothing in her had ever collapsed, but something in the careful architecture of her face that had been held at effort for 5 days moved, very slightly, into something else. She held my gaze for 3 seconds. Then she said to the clerk calmly, I will need a moment before the review begins. I have something to finish first. She walked back across the hold to the secondary conduit housing and stood beside me, not behind me, beside me. The relay board, she said, nodding at my hand. Right, I said, yes. Slot B, not slot A, she said. The housing runs a reversed orientation on this vessel class. I should have told you 4 days ago. I looked at the board. She was correct. I'd have put it in wrong. I slotted it into B. The conduit reading steadied immediately. I logged it, and I stood there beside her in the hum of a system that was working the way it was supposed to work, and I thought about 5 days of small corrections and careful watching, and a name spoken in a transit hold where no one else had bothered. I said, what does the reinstatement review mean? For you. It means, she said, that there will be a great deal of administrative process, that the Sorath seat designations will require formal petition to restore, that the compact will move very slowly. She paused, and that VT1194 will cease to exist as a category. Good, I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, you have a bunk on this vessel. Barely qualifies, I said, but yes. And after this transit, another assignment. I go where the compact sends systems techs. Another pause. The circulation system ran steady and warm around us. There will be Sorath stations to bring back online, she said. 17 of them. Most will have degraded environmental systems, pressure differentials, thermal variances, relay boards installed backward. She did not look at me when she said it. She was looking at the conduit housing. It would be useful to have someone who already knows how to listen to what is wrong. I didn't answer immediately. I thought about it the way I thought about a pressure reading, steadily, without hurrying toward a conclusion the numbers hadn't earned yet. Then I said, I'd have to hear the systems first. Of course, she said. And you'd have to tell me what to listen for. I usually do, she said. I nodded. She nodded. We stood in intake hold 7 of the Meridian, while the clerk at the far end of the row waited with a registry update form and a great deal of pending administrative process, and neither of us moved toward it yet, because the system was running properly, and the name in the room was the right one, and neither of us was in any particular hurry to give that back.